You want to be free, but you do not know what that means. You speak of financial freedom as though money were the only currency. You imagine a life unburdened by debt, by labor, by the exhaustion of scarcity. But beneath this fantasy lies something older, more primitive, more hidden. What you call freedom is often the unconscious wish to escape sacrifice, to bypass the necessary wound. But the psyche does not forget what is evaded. The debt of desire accrues interest, and in the end, you will pay. The only question is when. We are not born with the capacity to delay gratification. We are born demanding infants of need, crying into the void for milk, warmth, touch. And it is only through rupture, through the necessary denials of life, that we are forced to reckon with a world that does not bend to our impulses. This is the first repression, the realization that not everything can be had, and not now. The ego, that trembling structure built to mediate between our desires and the world's indifference, is forged in this crucible, and from the very beginning, it seeks compromise. But compromise demands loss, sacrifice, deferral. And here begins the true conflict. The tension between what we want and what we can bear to wait for. Financial freedom, in this sense, is not a goal, it is a symptom, a symbolic expression of deeper psychic tensions. You say you want to escape the system, the grind, the dependence, but what you really want is a release from the deeper anxiety, the fear of being helpless, the terror of being controlled. Money becomes a surrogate for the breast, for the parent, for God. It is the omnipotent fantasy to never need, to never beg, to never lack. But to reach that state, you must pass through the valley of sacrifice. And here, the unconscious revolts. You resist the budget, not because you lack discipline, but because the budget is a reminder of absence. You avoid saving, not because you are stupid, but because saving is a confrontation with finitude, the reality that you cannot have everything, that every yes is a no to something else. Each denied pleasure is a small death, and the unconscious grieves it. So you spend, you distract, you borrow against the future, as if the future were some other self's problem. A split-off part of you that can absorb the pain you refuse to feel now. But the psyche keeps the books, and what is not felt now will return later with interest. Sacrifice now or suffer later. It is not a slogan. It is a law of the unconscious. When desire is not regulated, it becomes tyrannical. When pain is not metabolized, it becomes fate. And yet, even this knowledge does not liberate you. You understand the logic, you know the rules, and still you sabotage, you regress, you self-destruct. Why? Because beneath every financial impulse lies a deeper narrative, a family myth, a trauma, a silence. The child who watched his parents fight over bills. The girl who learned that money equals love. The boy whose poverty became his shame, whose success must now mask the wound. These scripts live on, not in memory, but in repetition, unconscious patterns that reenact old dramas under the guise of adulthood. To gain freedom, you must first confront the ghost in your wallet. Who are you when you spend? Who are you when you save? What voice whispers in your ear when you walk away from the sale, or swipe the card again knowing you cannot afford it? These are not financial questions. They are psychoanalytic ones. The unconscious does not care for your spreadsheets. It cares for your pain, your unresolved guilt, your repressed rage, your buried sense of unworthiness. And until these are faced, not bypassed, not rationalized, But truly faced, no financial plan will hold, because it is not a plan you are resisting. It is your past. Freedom is not achieved by control alone. It is achieved by mourning, by grieving the fantasy that you can have it all, without trade-offs, without time, without tension, by recognizing that some part of you does not want to be free because freedom means responsibility, and responsibility means no longer blaming the world for your suffering. The unconscious is not your enemy. It is your history. And history, if ignored, becomes destiny. You will either sacrifice the comfort of the moment or the possibility of a future. There is no middle ground. And yet, to sacrifice is not to lose. It is to invest, to choose what matters over what distracts, to bind your impulses to a larger vision, not because you hate yourself, but because you have begun to remember the deepest freedom is not from pain, but from compulsion, from the tyrannies of avoidance, from the endless repetition of a wound that refuses to be named. You cannot out-earn your past. You cannot out-save your shame. You must go inward. You must listen. Beneath the noise of desire, the ache of longing, the thrill of consumption, there is a silence, a truth, a fracture. Go there. Stay there. Do not flinch, for only there, in the cave of repression, in the theater of psychic survival, does real freedom begin. Not as comfort, not as abundance, but as recognition, as the slow and sobering realization that what you called money was always a mirror, and what you feared losing was never the cash, but the illusion that you could have everything without ever paying the price. But the price has always been there, waiting in the shadows. It waits in the quiet moments, in the restless nights when the credit card balance haunts you like a silent creditor of the soul. It waits in the choices you never made because the appetite for more devoured the patience for less. And it waits in the buried knowledge that every act of avoidance has already mortgaged tomorrow's peace. You do not escape the price. You only choose when you will pay and in what currency, in the deliberate pain of sacrifice, or in the crushing weight of regret. The ego's clever defenses whisper otherwise. They tell you it's too small to matter, that tomorrow is vast and forgiving, that indulgence is freedom and denial is oppression. But the defenses lie. Their purpose is not to protect you from pain, but to keep the unconscious undisturbed, to preserve the fragile illusion that you are in control when, in truth, you are caught in the repetition of ancient patterns, walking paths laid down before you could speak. You imagine that earning more will fix it, that if you just increase the inflow, you can outrun the outflow. But this too is a fantasy. Without inner work, every dollar becomes a vessel for unresolved desire. It leaks through the cracks of repression. It is spent on substitutes, on symbols, on momentary anesthetics for the ache you refuse to name. The issue is not the money. It is the relationship to it. The unconscious is a miser. It hoards old wounds and bankrupts the present with debts inherited from the past. And until these debts are brought to light, you will remain enslaved not to markets, not to employers, but to your own unseen compulsions. Consider this. Every act of saving is an act of mourning. You are mourning the thing you wanted but did not choose, the impulse denied in service of something larger. To save is to accept limitation, to renounce the infantile belief in boundless gratification. And that is why you resist. Because saving is not only economic, it is existential. It confronts you with finitude, with the reality that you are a being bound by time and scarcity. To budget is to admit you cannot have it all. To invest is to embrace delay, to tether yourself to the slow rhythm of growth rather than the instant hit of pleasure. And the unconscious rebels, for it remembers a time when all needs were answered at once. When the breast arrived with the cry, it remembers omnipotence, and it cannot bear its loss. The struggle is not to discipline the wallet, it is to discipline the psyche, to tolerate the anxiety of enoughness, to endure the silence that comes when the noise of consumption subsides. In that silence, something deeper stirs the fear that if you are not buying, not earning, not climbing, you are nothing. That without the next acquisition, the next hit of dopamine, you will have to face the hollowness beneath. This is the true terror, that you have confused having with being, and without the one, the other collapses. Financial freedom, then, is not won in the market, but in the mind. It is not the freedom to spend endlessly, but the freedom from the need to spend endlessly. It is the ability to hold desire without acting it out, to feel lack without rushing to erase it. This is not taught in schools. It is not sold in courses. It is earned in the patient work of self-confrontation, the analysis of your patterns, the decoding of your resistances, the unmasking of the inner saboteur who wants the comfort of debt over the discomfort of discipline. You will encounter this saboteur every time you reach for the thing you know you do not need. He will say, "Life is short. Enjoy it now. Why suffer when you could feel good today?" And he will sound reasonable. But beneath his voice is another, quieter one, the voice of the wounded child, crying out for what was never received. You cannot silence that cry with purchases. You cannot soothe it with status or security. You must turn toward it, listen to it, allow it to grieve. Only then will the compulsion lose its hold. You think you are fighting laziness. You are fighting grief. The grief of all you cannot have, all you will never be, all the fantasies that must be surrendered if you are to live in reality. To confront this is painful, but it is also freeing. For in the ashes of those fantasies lies a different kind of wealth, the wealth of knowing you are no longer ruled by them. Sacrifice now or suffer later. It is not a threat. It is an axiom of life, as true in the psyche as in the market. The future will not forgive the debts of the present. The unconscious will not absolve what has been repressed. The work is to bring it forward, to endure the discomfort of awareness, to make choices in the light rather than stumble in the dark. And so I ask you, can you bear the emptiness that comes before fullness? Can you endure the ache of restraint, the restless boredom of living within your means, the quiet humiliation of choosing long-term gain over short-term validation? If you cannot, you will remain trapped not by banks or employers, but by yourself. This is the paradox. The more you flee sacrifice, the more you suffer. The more you embrace sacrifice, the freer you become. Not free of pain, but free of the compulsions that multiply it. Not free of work, but free of the inner war that turns work into servitude. To build wealth requires the ego to mediate between the insistent demands of the id and the prohibitions of the superego. To delay gratification is not a moral victory, but a necessary compromising and ongoing negotiation between instinctual desire and the constraints of reality. But know this, even in victory, the conflict does not end. The unconscious does not disappear. It waits, it tests, it whispers old seductions when you are tired, lonely, uncertain. This is the lifelong work to hear the whisper and not obey it, to recognize it as the voice of the past and not the guide to your future. Freedom is not given, it is forged, and the forge is fire. If you cannot stand the heat, you will spend your life chasing shadows, burning your energy on distractions that leave you empty. But if you endure, If you hold steady through the burning, you will emerge tempered, stronger, calmer, capable of choosing not only what you want, but who you will become. This is the deeper truth. Money is never just money. It is a mirror of the self. It reflects your fears, your hungers, your secret beliefs about what you deserve. To master it, you must first master what it reflects. Otherwise, no matter how much you earn, you will remain poor in the only currency that matters, the ability to govern yourself. Sacrifice now or suffer later. This is not advice. It is reality. And reality does not negotiate. It does not care for excuses, for intentions, for the inner dramas you use to postpone your reckoning. It waits silently for you to decide. Will you turn toward the pain or away from it? Will you confront the emptiness or fill it with another distraction? Will you pay now in discipline and patience, or pay later in chaos and despair? The choice is yours. But the unconscious is watching. It always collects what it is owed. And in the end, you cannot bargain with the truth. You can only face it. You can only pay what life demands in full. You think you are awake, that your decisions are conscious, rational, deliberate. But the truth is this: you are dreaming even now. You are moving through life inside a carefully constructed fantasy, built brick by the unconscious to shield you from pain. The numbers in your bank account, the possessions in your home, the endless hours of work and consumption, all of them are props in a theater whose script was written long before you knew there was a script at all. And like every dream, there is a truth beneath the surface, a buried logic that reveals itself only when you stop fleeing and begin to watch. It begins with repression, the first act of psychic survival as a child. You encountered needs too vast, fears too overwhelming, realities too unbearable. You learned unconsciously to push them down, to hide them from yourself, to split the intolerable from the self you could tolerate. But the repressed does not vanish. It lives on in disguise. It emerges as impulse, as resistance, as sabotage, and it writes itself into your relationship with money. The impulse to spend recklessly is not random. It is an acting out of hunger, a desperate attempt to fill the void left by unmet needs. The resistance to saving is not laziness. It is a protest against the original deprivation, a refusal to experience lack again. The compulsion to acquire more, always more, is the voice of the unconscious crying out for what was once denied: love, safety, recognition, power. Money becomes the placeholder for these lost objects, a symbol charged with longing and rage. And so the unconscious plays its game. You believe you are buying shoes, gadgets, vacations, but what you are really buying is a momentary illusion of wholeness. You are not saving for the future, because to save would mean to confront emptiness in the present. You avoid budgets, because to budget is to admit limitation, and limitation is intolerable to the child within you who once believed that all needs should be met instantly and fully. The ego collaborates in this theater. It whispers rationalizations, excuses, denials. It says, "I deserve this. Life is hard. Tomorrow will take care of itself." But beneath these rationalizations lies a deeper fear that if you were to stop spending, stop distracting, stop running, you would have to face yourself. And perhaps you suspect, though you do not say it aloud, that what you would find there is not enough success, not enough value, not enough love. This is the secret terror the unconscious guards, the terror of insufficiency. And as long as it remains hidden, it will rule you. Sacrifice now or suffer later. But sacrifice is not only economic, it is psychological. It requires you to surrender illusions you have clung to for years. The illusion of endless abundance, the illusion of escape, the illusion that someone else, a parent, a partner, a system will ultimately save you from yourself. To sacrifice is to accept the wound, to admit that life will never offer perfect security, that no amount of wealth can purchase freedom from anxiety, from mortality, from loss. To sacrifice is to grow up, and growing up is the most difficult task the psyche can undertake. The unconscious does not want this. It resists maturation with all its cunning. It pulls you back into fantasy, into repetition, into the warm arms of self-deception. It is easier to live in debt than to live in reality. Easier to blame the world than to confront your own complicity. Easier to seek another hit of pleasure than to endure the raw ache of ungratified desire. But this ease is an illusion. For the longer you avoid the reckoning, the heavier the suffering becomes. The sacrifices you refused earlier return magnified, transformed into crises you cannot ignore. Bankruptcy, broken relationships, the quiet despair of a life squandered in pursuit of what never mattered. And yet even then, many choose not to see. They double down on distraction. They numb themselves with consumption, with work, with fantasy. They hope, secretly, that the end will come before the bill arrives. But the bill always arrives. The question is not whether you will pay, but whether you will pay consciously or unconsciously, willingly or unwillingly, with discipline or with despair. To pay consciously is to begin the work of analysis, to turn inward and uncover the hidden forces that bind you, to sit with the urges, the anxieties, the compulsions, and ask, whose voice is this? Where did it begin? What pain am I trying not to feel? This work is slow. It is uncomfortable. It strips away the protections you thought were part of you. And at first, it feels like death. But it is not death. It is the beginning of freedom. For when you can endure the silence beneath the noise, you discover a different relationship to lack. You see that lack is not an enemy, but a teacher. It shows you the contours of your desire, the wounds you carry, the illusions you must relinquish. And in that seeing, the compulsion loosens. You are no longer driven blindly. You can choose. You can sacrifice not as an act of punishment, but as an act of love for your future self, for the life you wish to create, for the person you are becoming. This is not easy. It never will be. The unconscious does not yield its power overnight. It fights, it seduces, it punishes. It would rather destroy than surrender. But if you persist, if you stay in the fire without fleeing, you will emerge different. You will no longer be a slave to impulse. You will no longer confuse spending with living. You will no longer sell your future to soothe your present. You will begin to glimpse what true freedom feels like. Not the freedom to have everything, but the freedom to need less. Not the freedom from sacrifice, but the freedom that only sacrifice makes possible. This is the paradox, and it is the truth the ego was built to conceal. But now you see it, and once seen, it cannot be unseen. Beneath the surface, beyond the ego's defenses, there is a darker current. It is older than money, older than you, older even than the civilization that taught you to save, spend, earn, and strive. It is the death drive. Freud named it Thanatos, a force pulling us toward destruction, toward inertia, toward the silent peace of nothingness. You feel it in the quiet urge to give up, to let the balance slip further into debt, to watch the numbers bleed red as if they belong to someone else. You feel it when you say, "What's the point?" and reach for another indulgence you cannot afford. The death drive is patient. It does not scream, it whispers. And every time you sabotage your own progress, it smiles. This is the secret truth. Part of you wants to fail. Part of you craves the collapse. Not because you are weak, but because failure promises relief. If you ruin yourself fully, you no longer have to struggle. You no longer have to fight the endless tension between desire and reality. You can sink back into the warm darkness of helplessness, into the fantasy that someone, the state, a partner, a parent, God will come and save you from the ruins. But no one is coming. The infant once believed the mother would appear at every cry. The adult must face that no such omnipotence exists. This confrontation is agony, and the unconscious will do anything to avoid it. It will invent stories. I'm just bad with money. I deserve to enjoy life now. Tomorrow will be different. But these are not stories of hope. They are stories of avoidance. Avoidance is expensive. It costs more than dollars. It costs time, energy, dignity. It robs you of the chance to grow. Each act of avoidance enlarges the psychic wound it was meant to soothe until your entire life orbits around it. You think you are free because you can choose what to buy, but in truth you are trapped in a loop, a repetition, compulsion, playing out the same pattern of lack and excess, accumulation and loss, desire and disappointment. You cannot outspend the death drive. You cannot earn enough to silence it. You must confront it directly. To confront it is to encounter guilt, not the superficial guilt of overspending or failing to budget, but the deep, unarticulated guilt that lives in the unconscious like a hidden charge on your soul. Guilt for wanting more than you were allowed to have. Guilt for surviving when others suffered. Guilt for turning away from your own suffering and pretending it did not exist. This guilt is unbearable, so you cover it over with consumption, with debt, with fantasies of rescue. But guilt does not disappear. It festers in the shadows. It drives you to punish yourself in small, almost imperceptible ways. The purchases you regret, the opportunities you squander, the chances you refuse. Every financial mistake is a confession, a message from the unconscious saying, I am unworthy. I do not deserve stability, freedom, peace. Until you hear that message and challenge it, no amount of external discipline will save you. You think sacrifice means pain, but sacrifice is not pain. Sacrifice is transformation. It is the deliberate choice to relinquish an immediate pleasure for the sake of a larger, deeper good. It is the ego asserting mastery over the drives that would otherwise enslave you. But even sacrifice can become corrupted. If it is done out of guilt alone, it becomes self-punishment. If it is done out of fear, it becomes repression. True sacrifice emerges from recognition, the clear-eyed awareness of your patterns, your desires, your wounds. It is not an act of violence against the self. It is an act of care. The unconscious resists this care. It prefers the familiar pain of repetition to the unfamiliar possibility of change. To change is to risk loss, and the unconscious fears loss above all. It would rather keep you trapped in scarcity than face the terror of stepping into freedom. For freedom is terrifying. Freedom means no one else is responsible for your choices. Freedom means you can no longer blame your parents, your upbringing, the system, or fate. Freedom means standing naked before reality, with no illusions to shield you from its cold gaze. Can you bear that gaze? Can you accept that no amount of money will ever make you invulnerable? That even with financial freedom, you will still be subject to time, to loss, to death. This is the final sacrifice. the surrender of the fantasy of total control. Once you surrender it, a strange calm descends. You realize you do not need to buy everything you want, because wanting is no longer a threat. You do not need to earn endlessly, because earning is no longer tied to your worth. You do not need to hoard for every possible catastrophe, because you accept that some catastrophes cannot be prevented. You are no longer enslaved by fear or compulsion. You can act, not react. You can save without resentment, spend without guilt, work without self-betrayal. This is financial freedom, as the unconscious understands it. Not the absence of limits, but the ability to live within them without rage or despair. And yet even here, the work is not done. The unconscious does not die. It watches. It waits. In moments of weakness, it sends up old temptations, old fears, old scripts. You must remain vigilant. You must return again and again to the inner confrontation. This is the path. There is no other. Sacrifice now or suffer later. Choose sacrifice and you will still suffer, but your suffering will be meaningful, ordered, creative. Choose avoidance and you will suffer blindly, chaotically, destructively. The choice is not between suffering and peace. It is between suffering that leads somewhere and suffering that leads nowhere. Which will you choose? The unconscious is silent now. It has no answer. It is waiting for you to act, and it will wait forever or until you pay what life demands. And yet here you stand, at the edge of the labyrinth, staring into the mouth of the unconscious. You have walked its corridors, felt its walls close in, heard its whispers. You have seen how money was never just numbers, never just bills or coins, but a cipher, a language in which your deepest fears and desires spoke to you without words. You have seen how every impulse to spend, every refusal to save, every act of self-sabotage was a symptom, a message from the depths. You wanted freedom, but what you found was conflict. You wanted control, but what you found was compulsion. And now you know there is no freedom without sacrifice, no peace without loss, no mastery without first bowing to reality. You see, the ego was built to protect you, to shield you from unbearable truths. It gave you fantasies of abundance, fantasies of escape, fantasies of a future where you could have it all without paying the price. It worked for a time. It let you survive. But survival is not living. And now the cost of those fantasies has become too high. To live is to choose. To choose is to renounce. Every act of saving is an act of mourning, a small funeral for the life you will not lead, the pleasures you will not taste, the desires you will not satisfy. But in this mourning there is power. For only in letting go do you make room for something new. Do you see now? The freedom you seek is not out there, waiting in some distant future where your bank account is full and your debts erased. It is here, in this moment, in this decision, to face what you have avoided, to endure what you thought was unbearable, to accept what is. Sacrifice now or suffer later. This is not a threat. It is a law of existence. The unconscious does not negotiate, does not forgive, does not forget. It keeps its accounts perfectly, and every debt must be paid. But sacrifice is the repression of instinctual drives, a painful necessity for the ego to adapt to reality. It is not pure creation, but a trade-off, renouncing immediate pleasure to avoid the chaos that unchecked desire would unleash. To sacrifice is to step into reality, to see yourself not as you wish to be, but as you are. This is the final truth. There is no rescue, no parent, no savior, no system that will absolve you of the task. You are responsible. You have always been responsible. And in this responsibility lies your only hope of freedom. You can continue as you are, clinging to the illusions, waiting for the pain to catch you in its jaws. Or you can turn and face it now, on your terms, with your eyes open. The choice is yours. The unconscious is silent now, waiting. It will wait forever. But life will not, and neither will time. Pay what is owed, or lose yourself to the debt you feared to acknowledge. Sacrifice now, or suffer later. There is no third way.